I'm resuming recording. Everybody feeling good?
Yep.
All right, I'll start letting people in here. I'm sure there'll probably be a few audio disruptions, so I'll just make sure people are aware. Everybody, we'll get started in just a moment here. We're just giving people a chance to get in and get their audio settled. And as you can see, we're in a Zoom meeting, so you'll have to make sure that you mute yourself if you're not speaking. You're welcome. We'll get started in just a moment here, just giving people a few more minutes to join. It seems like a pretty good critical mass to start with. So welcome everybody to today's coffee break. As you have already deduced, I'm sure this is in Zoom meeting. It's not webinar like we usually use. So that means that you can unmute yourself at will and you can turn your cameras on or off. That's up to you. But we do intend this to be a good discussion. We have a panel here that will lead that discussion. We have some questions for the group and the panel specifically, but everyone's encouraged to share their own thoughts on the matter and their own concerns. So we do encourage you to unmute yourself and just speak your mind there. If you are in a quiet environment, obviously, and you can't speak, then you can use the chat. That's also fine. And videos are totally optional, but we would like to see everybody. So if you're able to and willing to, we'd love to have those cameras enabled as well. If you have any technical issues, feel free to reach out to me, but otherwise I hope you enjoy the session. And without further ado, I want to hand it off to Julia Finocchi. Julia?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this important discussion. We have today our coffee break on education in crisis. And with us, we are grateful for two ACRO members and volunteers who are joining us today. They are Christopher Adams. He is the Associate Director of International Admissions Operations at Indiana University in Bloomington. Chris received his bachelor's degree at Indiana State in 2011 and soon after found himself working in the field of international education at Indiana University. Following many roles, he now serves as the Associate Director of that international admissions operation, ensuring that all applications to the university are successfully processed. Chris has participated with ACRO on many professional endeavors for which we're grateful. These include the Cuba Project and the inclusive admissions policies for displaced and vulnerable students. He's currently completing a master's degree in international and comparative education at Indiana University. Also joining us today, another stellar volunteer, Stacy Gustafson, is the Enrollment and Student Access Director at Montgomery College in Maryland, where she oversees the admission, student enrollment, and visitor services. She has over 15 years of experience, primarily in community college, with a focus on domestic and international admission, student access, enrollment, equity, and inclusion. She holds the office of Secretary of the Maryland International Education Consortium Board of Directors. While being an active ACRO member, she's also active in NAFSA, and she's participated in developing the policy paper with us on inclusive admissions policies for displaced and vulnerable students. She holds a master's in higher ed administration from Penn State University and is currently pursuing her doctorate from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in the field of educational policy, organization and leadership, international education, administration, and leadership. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to tell you a little bit about their experiences. But let me look at the agenda first. So we've just talked about who's here, but I also want to just take a moment to mention about how this impetus for this coffee break and education and crisis came about. Unfortunately, we have many crises to choose from in our world today, whether we're looking at COVID, Afghanistan, the recent earthquake in Haiti, Lebanon, Syria, and the resulting growing number of refugees that we see in the world. In a state of wanting to do something, I contacted Chris Adams to see how he was feeling. And he said he felt much the same way I was, that there had to be something we could do. Following those discussions with Chris and with other colleagues and staff, we decided that this was bigger than just a single coffee break or webinar, and have created a plan for a series of education in crisis. Toward the end of the webinar, we will cover some of the upcoming things that we have planned in this initiative. And I think that ultimately what I think about is that as educators, whether domestically, internationally, whatever our focus is, whether at the K through 12 level or in the higher education level, we're focused on and thinking about future aspirations and goals of students and scholars. So we strive to promote opportunities, skills, and tools for students and scholars for their future. So let's now hear from our colleagues about some of the ways they are working to do just that. Chris?
Thanks, Julia. And I'll second Julia by welcoming everybody. And it's great to see so many people here. So a couple weeks ago, Julia reached out, and I think her and I were sharing the same brainwaves or something. Back in 2019, Stacy and I both had worked on the paper that was referenced, and a lot of momentum was being built. And then, as we all know, COVID happened, and it kind of tripped up our step a bit. We had to focus on other things, kind of get back from helping displaced students a bit. But now it's good to see that after talking with Julia and then Stacy joining other people in the field, that we're trying to get this momentum back, and the Afghan crisis has really encouraged that. So just a bit of history, kind of going back to 2019. My supervisors at Indiana University in Bloomington asked me to talk to colleagues in the field to see how they were helping displaced students. About 15 years ago, we had a pretty robust program to help a significant Burmese population out of Indianapolis in Indiana. And since then, the support kind of waned. And so we checked and saw what our displaced population was, so specifically refugee asylees. And we basically had 1-for-1 from different countries. And we didn't have a significant, large population from a single source. So they were already at the university. They weren't receiving additional help. They just kind of gotten there on their own. So we really wanted to provide some additional services if they needed them, and see what else we could do. So I assisted ACRO with the article, and then also with Article 26 backpack, which Julia and Annetta have both helped to helm. And so we pretty quickly began accepting the Article 26 backpack, which, if any of you are unfamiliar with that, I would highly encourage you to look into it. You can find more info on the ACRO website. But we began accepting that as supplemental admissions materials. So the biggest problem admissions wise with this population that we see is they maybe don't have full transcripts, or they're missing a page or two. They may only have photocopies. So when we are working through the admissions process with these students, it really is a case-by-case basis. So in my office under admissions, we kind of set up a process to identify these students early. One big issue at our institution was since these students are residents under either asylum or refugee status, they would go through our domestic admissions office. And they would only be identified once there were issues with the documents, or they may just go through the process altogether and we may never find them. So we worked on collaboration between the International Admissions Office and the domestic admissions. We adjusted our application platform a bit with more specific questions on the student's background, so we could help identify and just reach out to them early, let them know that there was additional support for them if they required it. So that really started the overarching process. So at IU, like I said, we didn't have anything robust in place, nothing centralized. We had a bunch of different units on campus doing multiple things without any interaction or cohesion. Myself, my supervisor, and a director of student services are in our office started a task force. And with that, we pulled in some faculty who their research was focused on displaced persons, involuntary migration. So they were doing work in specific countries like Jordan, refugee placement within the US, resettlement. We worked with a local resettlement organization called Exodus based out in Indianapolis. So we really were going from the bottom up and just trying to organize all the resources on campus to better provide for the experience of this population at Indiana University. So with that, we established the task force, and the first year we were able to provide a couple scholarships. We tried to see about recruitment to see if we could recruit these students from abroad, but the immigration challenges were there to have their status approved. So instead we focused on individuals already within the state of Indiana. We did that specifically because the finances were a significant challenge for students coming to study. A lot of them are qualified academically. We figured out a way to have them meet our admission standards, both academically, documentation wise, but finances were the biggest barrier. So we identified students within the state of Indiana, and their only issue was they didn't have the money to come. So we were able to work with them, got them in-state tuition, which offloaded a significant financial burden for them just based on tuition, the base cost. And we were able to identify scholarships that were just kind of sitting there. We had money around, but it wasn't being applied to any students. So we found out that these students did qualify, so we were able to get them full ride scholarships. We work with a community to help them be set up in jobs so that they're financially independent, even on top of the cost of study. And then we also reached out to community members for housing, all those additional things that aren't directly tied to academic study, to make sure that they were effectively resettled and that they were set up to succeed at the university. So like I said, kind of early on, each of these is a case study in of their own. They all have unique backgrounds, unique experiences. They're at different points in their academic study or their job search. So I guess to summarize, we're really doing a grassroots movement to get everybody together and provide a support network for these students on campus rather than each unit doing their own thing in a vacuum. And we're trying to grow that currently. A lot more is underway. But as of right now, we just kind of have that task force together, and we're trying to strengthen those bonds and provide for students more and attract additional ones since we do have that support now. Yeah. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stacy.
Chris, I'm going to stop you for just a second because a question came into the chat, and I think this is a very kind of basic question that people have out there. And you talked about identifying students. So the question is, how did you identify the students? What steps did you take to identify where the students were?
Yeah, so great question. Admittedly, a lot of them self-identify either through the application or they approach the domestic admissions office or us. Some of them will come up because they can't meet our standards. So with domestic admissions, they send the application over to our office since most of these students have study outside of the US. So we're going to have to take a look at their transcripts anyway, review them. So a lot of them come up that way. Additionally, we have, like I said, we work with our community members. So Exodus, if they know of a student who wants to resume their educational path, they'll give us a heads up. Yeah, multiple different ways. There's not a single strategy that we use to identify them outside of self-identifying and then just working with the community. And then they usually just provide us contacts or will give us information on students who are wanting to study, but who may not think to apply because they can't pay for it or because they can't think they can meet standards. So really working with a bunch of different groups to identify and then get them admitted. All right, so yeah, with that, Stacy's going to talk now about her experience, which I believe is pretty different from ours. We have very different populations, different institutional structures. So without further ado, Stacy, do you want to hop in?
I will jump in. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for inviting me to be here today. So my experience is a little bit different. As Chris mentioned earlier, we worked together on the policy paper, and I got involved in that because I work at a very large community college. And I think community colleges are really uniquely positioned to work with vulnerable and displaced students. We're very much embedded in the community and responsive to community needs. Our open admissions policies really lend themselves to work with this population. We prepare students with the necessary skills to succeed academically. We assist them to learn US higher education systems, prepare them for transfer to four-year universities, provide workforce development, skills training. Our classes tend to be more affordable and smaller sizes. We've got flexible schedules. So all those things make us a good entry point for refugee, asylee, vulnerable, displaced students. If you're not familiar with Montgomery College, we're located in Maryland and the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Our county serves a very large refugee and asylee population. We've got individuals from Ethiopia, Iraq, Burma, Afghanistan, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, amongst many others. And as a home to so many asylees and refugees, many of them make their way to Montgomery College. We were actually rated the most diverse community college in the continental US. We've got students from over 160 countries. And so because of that, we've become very thoughtful about how we serve our foreign-born students, whether they're displaced or vulnerable, here on F1 visas or undocumented students. So through that, we've developed a number of supports and assistances that are really there and available and can be activated at any time. Recently, the governor of Maryland expressed his commitment to the displaced individuals coming from Afghanistan, and that has sparked a lot of conversation on our campus about, one, what should we expect? They're expecting at least 180 to 300 individuals coming from Afghanistan, specifically to Maryland. Maryland's been a longtime supporter of the SIV program. And if you're not familiar with that, that's the program that's targeted towards individuals who provided intelligence and have assisted the US as interpreters and drivers and security guards, as well as other critical roles within Iraq and Afghanistan. And because of their assistance to the US, their lives are in significant danger. So our governor recently said, no, he's really committed to supporting these individuals. And so we're expecting them to come to Maryland, but no one's quite sure what the needs will be from Montgomery College, when they'll come, and how we can best assist them. So there's a lot of really good conversation happening. But while we're waiting to see who these students will be and what the actual needs will be when they get here, you know, we're reviewing what we've already got in place so that we can activate that as needed. So some of the things we've done over the last few years to support our vulnerable and displaced students is ensuring that we've got frontline assistance in multiple languages. So it's really important to us to hire staff that speak multiple languages. We've also got an over-the-phone interpretation system that we use with our visitors. It supports over 200 languages. So really any language that a student has come in with and has needed help, we put them on speakerphone in an office. And some of those calls, you know, will be there for 30 minutes or an hour, whatever the time is that the student needs. And that's another important part of the support that we offer. I oversee admissions, but I also oversee our enrollment support centers that we have on each campus. They were formerly called welcome centers, but we've expanded them. So we're actually handling admissions and the processing of all the paperwork as well. And we handle visitor services. And so my team does a lot of this one-on-one work. We do a lot of educating foreign-born students on how US higher education works. We help connect them with transfer resources if they're looking to go that route. We provide Facebook information sessions in multiple languages. And we make sure that staff have a lot of cross-cultural training and competency and communication training, because we can put a welcoming message out, but if they come to our front counters and our staff don't know how to work with these students and don't understand the issues that they're coming with, the messaging can seem really hollow. So we've also focused on training the staff so that they're ready to work with these students. We connect them with peer-to-peer programs, and a lot of what we've focused on are the holistic supports. So we have open admissions, so that some of the paperwork challenges they might find in other environments are less of an issue for us. We get them placed, we help them and connect them with the level that they need and try to meet them where they are. We've got a community engagement office that is actually embedding themselves throughout the community. So for students who perhaps are really located in a very specific area of the county and maybe don't have transportation or don't really have the familiarity to move beyond a few blocks, we're embedding offices throughout the county to serve those students, basic English classes, computer technology classes. We've got mental health resources that we can connect students with, food pantries on all of our campuses. We've got mobile food markets that have been really a lifeline for a lot of students. And even when COVID sent us all to our homes to work and to take classes, our mobile markets continued on campus once a month on each of our 3 campuses. Earlier in the year, we had received some feedback that a number of our international students were really struggling. And so we created a mobile market just for that population. And we had about 100 students attend that, which was really disheartening, I think, to see that so many international students specifically were struggling at that level. But they're welcome, and we've got these resources for every student and community members alike that come to our mobile markets. We've also got a refugee center. So for those that come in refugee status or asylee status, they can be referred from the resettlement agencies directly to our refugee center that partners with the county. And they provide workforce training, they provide English classes, they provide cultural adjustment workshops and helping individuals understand what's required in an American workforce, or how to create a resume for a US job, things like that. And they really get them connected. We've also got free ESOL classes within the county. We know historically that many of the refugee students that we see come with low literacy rates and low English levels. And so they benefit greatly from some of those English classes that are offered at both the Refugee Center and then through our separate ESOL program. And then we've also got academic English programs and the credit side of the house, which also offers English classes. So a big part of what we're doing is really trying to connect students and thinking about them holistically, connecting them with resources if they are looking and do have previous higher ed experience, helping them get their credential evaluations, helping them through the application and registration process. So I think one of the things that we do quite well, I think, is really connecting with the community. So listening to the community, finding out from them and assessing the needs through the community, and then partnering with our community partners. So partnering with cultural centers and community centers and faith-based organizations, all working together, because a lot of this work, these students don't come and just need support to register for a class, right? They're making a huge life change. And so those wraparound services have been really important and something that we focused a lot on quite a bit through our work. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing. Like I said, we're waiting to see how many students come to us through this push for the SIV, the special immigrant visa holders that are coming specifically to Maryland, amongst a number of other states. And, check back. I hope in a few months we have more information, but it's been a unique opportunity because so many of the media outlets are discussing it, and with the governor making a public statement, it's actually caused a lot of campus stakeholders to start asking questions and connecting. I think Chris talked about those connections and how people may be doing things in different corners of the institution. For us, this seems to be the moment now that people are asking a lot of questions because it's been in the news. So what do we do? How can we help? How can we be prepared? And I'm hopeful that through these communication networks, that we'll have an even stronger support system going forward for these students. So with that, we want to hear from all of you. This is something we're all learning, and I think we're all looking for ideas of how we can support students. So what are your institutions doing? What sort of policies have you all put in place to help your displaced students? Anyone have some examples? And yes, as Mike noted in the chat, please unmute yourselves, jump in. This is definitely a conversation.
Exactly. And I think what both of you had to say, and Stacey, listening to what you just described, that incredible network of support, like you said, those wraparound services, of realizing it's not just the registration for campus, it's not just the financial, there's a whole ring of sort of things that are needed, and very impressive what you've both done. So let's hear from you all. Who do we have here? Anybody else from community college, large public institution, private institutions? What have you done?
I'm from a community college. I'm afraid I've just started recently though, so I'm still picking up some of the information on how we help these students. Sorry.
That was Bryn. Tell us where you're from too, as you speak with us. We'd love to hear and provide any support that we can to you. I'd love for the person who chatted me about where they were from to share some of their experiences.
I don't have any good advice, but I do have a question.
Please.
My name is Christy Mayo. I am from Van Andel Institute Graduate School. So we're a small private graduate school housed in a research institute. So we're definitely unique. But we bring in small cohorts every year. And for 2020, our cohort was supposed to be 12. And half of them were international and couldn't get their visas. So of course that was really challenging. But one thing that came up this year that I worked with, we have a director of, because we're very small, each of us does a lot of different things, but we have a director of student support services, and she was working with a couple of international students to help them secure housing before they got here. But the problem was they didn't have this specific student, even though she attended undergrad in the United States, she lived on campus. And because we're a research institute, we don't have on-campus housing. Students live in apartments. We don't have anything that we can provide to them, but we provide them with a stipend to cover all of their living expenses. But one of our international students didn't have any kind of credit history because she had lived on campus in her undergrad. She didn't, all those things that like apartment complexes want to see in order to make sure that you're going to pay your rent. No letter from me would suffice. Even a phone call wouldn't suffice. Like they just gave her a really hard time. And so our director of student support services is talking about maybe trying to partner with like an apartment complex close by, to like set up some kind of agreement. But I'm just wondering if anybody's had that before, and if you can offer any suggestions for those type of situations, because we just, these poor students, we want to do everything we can to help them get here, and then people won't give them a place to live, even if they have money. So I'm just looking for suggestions. Thank you for doing this, by the way.
Yeah, from our perspective, we've had a lot of success working with local religious groups or charity organizations. They have the experience of housing individuals. If you can get an agreement with an apartment complex or something that's related to the university in somehow, I think that's a great idea. Especially for international students, they have to show that they have the finances to support themselves while in the US. So they already have money more or less set aside to pay for housing. So any type of agreement with your institution, I think that would work really well of kind of funneling them in there. And ultimately it's a win-win because they can fill their apartment units and you have a place for your students to stay. So like I mentioned earlier, that community outreach is really important. But yeah, just see what's available in your area that's already there. A lot of what we've done here, it's already there. We just needed to make that connection.
Yeah, we don't offer housing either, but most of our students that come to us, they tend to find us because they've already got family in the area or friends. So we don't necessarily recruit international students too heavily. They find us by our location. We do offer some general resources of kind of where they can go to look for housing, but it's not been something that's not something that we really get too involved in. So I would second what Chris says, is really partnering with some of the community organizations and local.
How about the Hive? Anybody else have suggestions or experience with this? Please feel free to speak up. Let's then move on, as you think about that, to some of our questions that we already have on the sheet for you. So any of you out there, does your institution have any policies designed to help displaced students or at-risk students? Any of you come up with anything? I see a couple of people here who I think really would have great insights to share. So please don't hesitate.
I guess to kickstart the conversation a bit, at IU, we don't have any established policy necessarily, but a lot of this motivation was started with DACA a few years ago. And the university did make some policy changes in regard to DACA. And then we kind of branched off from there. So again, just kind of identifying what's there already and seeing how it can be effective in expanding to more populations. But that's kind of what we did at our school.
We have open admissions. So certainly it's flexible financially. You know, there are a number of foundation scholarships and supports, especially now with COVID, that really put a spotlight on financial need. So we have a number of institutional opportunities that would serve students in these instances as well. And depending on their status, you know, if they're coming in as a SIV holder, for example, they're very likely eligible for financial aid. So that's something to look at too, depending on the visa type that they have. They may be eligible for Pell Grants or financial aid and other types of grants.
We did have Stacy, another Stacy, shared in the chat that for housing, you might have more luck asking your local groups, churches, social organizations for names of local landlords that are open to renting to refugees. And that the bigger complexes are probably less likely to do so and to adjust their policies based on what's going on. Anybody else want to comment on flexible admissions or flexible financial considerations? Any other community colleges in the group? How do you communicate your policies if you have them? And if not, what are your questions? What are you looking to answer? What are you looking to find out? Where are you in this process? If you want to do something, but you're not sure what to do, what are some of your questions?
If it helps, I've put together effectively a little poll that asks some of these questions just to get an idea of where the audience is at in terms of, you know, how many people actually have these policies, and getting maybe the impression that a lot of people here don't have anything nearly as robust as what Christopher and Stacy have. So I might launch this poll if that's all right with you guys.
Fantastic.
All righty. I'm logged in from another polling. Hold on one second. I mean, you can keep going. I just got to launch this here.
I think on that note too, Stacy and I have kind of been through this. So if all of you want to start, but you don't know how to get started, what steps to take, we're happy to help you strategize or maybe plan out what you can do on your specific campus and your unique environment, how to get connected. So even if you haven't done anything, feel free to throw out questions and we're happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, do we have policies? I think often these are really case by case situations in many instances. And what you do for other student populations sometimes are applicable. You know, I had a student yesterday I was working with who's homeless. So how do you get the paperwork through when there is no address to put down, right? And that's required on many of our forms and even the application. And so finding workarounds, you know, case by case is often how a lot of these things get resolved.
I think that's absolutely hitting the nail on the head, Stacy, that these are case by case and individual cases. I think that's one thing we found when we put together the inclusive admissions displaced person report, is that so much of what was done was done because we encountered a case that needed to be addressed. And maybe that's where some of you are. You have a particular case that you've encountered or has come through your door and you're trying to figure out how to address it. Nonetheless, that case is the building block for coming up with how do you do this in a more robust way, I think. So there was something in the chat. I believe somebody put something in here. Somebody says they haven't expanded their DACA financial aid, but it's interesting to consider it, and that would involve the state legislature to open up financial aid for funding for refugees who aren't eligible for the Title IV aid. And she went on to add more flexibility with our foundation scholarships. Anybody want to talk about foundation scholarships, or Chris, I think you even said that you found money in places that was available but not being utilized. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we had money. I don't want to say that was just kind of sitting there, but we may not have had an applicant that year for a specific Indiana resident scholarship, and this population qualified. It was an asylee student who had resided in Indiana over a year. So there, I think also like at IU, we haven't had any additional budget considerations. We haven't had added money thrown back into this. We've just been able to find stuff and be kind of, we've been able to effectively utilize what's already there. We're currently exploring a lot more that I can't necessarily talk about at the moment because it's not final. But we have considered talking to alumni. I know we have one who may start a new scholarship specifically for displaced persons. But yeah, there may be scholarship money just there that would qualify, and you may not think it would. So kind of being innovative in your approach, especially in the funding part. You don't have to do a whole lot. It's just kind of finding that needle in the haystack. But yeah, so a lot more is there than you may think is there currently, and you just kind of have to sleuth through it a bit.
All right, Mike, it looks like you've launched the poll. So if
Yeah,
y'all
sorry about that. It was telling me I couldn't launch it because I was logged in from another device, and I was just sitting here saying, what do you mean? I'm on this device, but either way. I hope this helps kind of get us a better idea of maybe guiding the discussion.
give you another 20 seconds to answer these or so.
I'm sure some require a little bit of thought. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in here for half a second? I'm Bert Anier. I'm from the University of Northern British Columbia. So way up there in the cold north, which means we get fewer students than many of you probably see with regards to international students or even refugees. But one of the things that happens in those cases is that as the registrar, I have the flexibility to make some concessions for students if we've got a special circumstance. It doesn't always make it perfect for the student, but we do have that opportunity. So admission is a little bit tighter because we're a university and we don't have an open admissions process. But we have found ways to allow the students to come in and do coursework that leads them towards where they need to go and at least give them the stability of having somewhere to study. Many of them having really good education, but not having the correct certifications for the country, right? So we have that situation with some students we've seen coming in via refugee status. We also have in our financial aid and awards, we have a number of emergency funds that we set aside, and each year they get used, hopefully, to the best of our ability for students that are in difficult situations. We're fortunate to have a couple of good community organizations where when we are looking for student supports, so connection with the community, connection with peers, and also looking for potential housing, we can sometimes reach out to them and they will help out. There are a number of families that sort of step out and say, okay, we will take care of them. But we are a small community, we are a small institution, so there's a lot of connection going on, and that is really helpful for us. I mean, if we were in a larger environment or the larger environments I worked in the past, it was less flexible for us to do these sort of things. But right now it's good. And so we don't really have policies. We have a person that is given that flexibility and allows us a little bit more room when something like this comes up.
Great, thanks, Bert. So wondering about those relationships you've made with some organizations, churches, whatever it might be. And this is for you as well as Stacy and Christopher. Have you formalized those relationships at all, or is this just sort of on an ad hoc as needed basis, or have they signed on to do something more permanently, or is this a one and done sort of thing?
I'll even show my face. Hang on a moment here. Make sure I'm in the right place. There we go. No, we actually do them at sort of a one-off thing. We have, through the professoriate here and other people, we have a great connection, but it is really an informal connection. And so depending on what the situation is, I will reach out to a professor who may be connected to that community and say, how can we use this community to connect with this student? And it doesn't always work perfectly, but it usually is pretty good because they're willing to step up and do some support, but it isn't formalized at this point, no.
Just for some context, I use in Bloomington, which is a Midwest college town. So our student population is about the same population as the permanent population of the city. So a lot of these organizations are just invariably interconnected with the university. So we've just worked on those, or not agreements, those relationships that are already there. I don't believe we have anything formal written down on paper, contracted, but those relationships are there and there's activity already. And then we just ask if that could be expanded to this population. So that's kind of what we're working on. But yeah, our community is just invariably connected to the university. So from our perspective, it was fairly easy to just hop on that train that was already going.
That's definitely the same experience that we've had, right? Being a community college. We've got our president has a community roundtable that meets regularly. We've got partners all throughout the institution in the community. We work very closely with the county council. And then we've got our community engagement office, and that's what they do, right? They work with the community. As I mentioned earlier, we're embedded throughout the community, giving classes. We've got ESOL classes that are given at middle schools and high schools all throughout the county. You know, even small things like, maybe not so small, all of our students can ride for free on the county buses. So they have transportation anywhere within the county. We offer shuttles between campuses as well. So it's really very far reaching. And then there's plenty of informal relationships as well.
Thank you. Those are some great points, Stacy, too. Just the transportation, access to transportation, right? Mike, I don't know if you can bring the poll results up again or not. It looks like, though, from what I saw, people are looking for ideas. They're looking for ways to start the conversation. Only a handful of yeses to the policies, but lots of people looking to develop things, and just simply a no to the answers. I think one of the things that you'll find, and I will go to this in just a minute, is that that report that we did on inclusive admissions and such really talks about that framework and the framework for the flexibility and the grassroots effort, because I think that's a large part what we're talking about. I think Stacy and Chris and even Bert have touched on it, that these are case by case things where we need to be attentive to what's going on. Yes, it's Montgomery College has certainly expanded this to their institution wide, but that oftentimes when we encounter somebody who is in need and at risk, it's as an individual that needs help. And so how can we take that, whatever we're going to do, and then model that again? How can we mirror that and do it for the next person who may not have the same situation, but have some of the same needs? So other comments, thoughts?
I'll just jump in and say, if you're not sure what the need is for your campus, reach out to your counselors and advisors. They're often the first folks that are going to know if a student is in trouble. Your admissions folks will likely know if someone's coming into the institution. And then if you do have resettlement agencies in your area, reaching out to them to find out what needs are. I think those are some of the spots. If you've got ESL programs on your campus, they may be aware of student needs. So just, I think it's that communication and just asking questions to find out where the needs are. Sometimes they're there and we just don't realize it.
A couple of other thoughts before we kind of wrap things up, as it is getting close to the hour. While we see these crises emerge, we don't necessarily see the students immediately, correct? I mean, we hear about something happening and we know it's catastrophic. We know that it's going to disrupt education and have a profound effect, but it doesn't walk through our door the next day. The reality is we will be seeing the results of several of these crises for years to come. And so being prepared doesn't mean it has to be in place right now. If you start building now, I am absolutely certain you will find a need for your services in the future. Sadly, the crises won't stop. There is likely to be another earthquake, another civil war, another hostile takeover, an economic crisis, political crisis, whatever it might be. And as my colleague said in her retirement farewell the other day, education does become political because the politics indeed impact our students who are looking to further their education. So we will see these things walk through the door. So it's always good to be prepared in any way that we can to assist them and to help them move on through the future. So let's go to the next slide, Mike, and let's just talk about a few things. But I want to say this is the first in a series of discussions. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed now, that's okay. We're going to keep having these discussions and we hope you'll keep joining us, and we're going to address specific things along the way as we and specific crises along the way as we and think about what tools do we have to support you in dealing with those crises and assisting students who have faced those disruptions to their education. Can we go to the next slide, Mike, if you're still there? I'm not sure if we've got him still.
Julia, this is Laurel Bannister from
Yes.
Incred.
Yes,
Yeah.
hi, Laurel.
Hi. Just backing up a little bit, this is maybe more of a question for Chris, but just with speaking to flexible admissions, just when you see, students not having maybe something that's comparable to a high school education, can you give maybe some specific examples, like how you've been flexible, how you make those decisions? And yeah, I'm sure it is a case by case basis, but yeah, how do you kind of justify your decisions when admitting students?
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time, but Burr, I may contact you later to ask about PLAR in Canada. So prior learning assessment is one way. Like you mentioned, Laurel, each case is going to be specific. So we may have incomplete documentation. At IU, our admissions policy is they have to complete high school or the equivalent. So there's a bit of flexibility in what that equivalent is to meet secondary completion. So ultimately that falls kind of on me and my supervisor to make that final call on, is this high school from a US sense or not? But I tend to work case by case with the student. The most frequent thing we find is they have photocopies, but not the original documents. And for whatever reason, they can't go back to their home country to get them, whether out of security, travel expenses, whatever reason it may be. So to go over that in a general sense, I work with them to reconstruct their history, make sure it's kind of an interview process. I'll talk to them about 2 or 3 times. It sounds a bit repetitive, but just make sure when they reconstruct their educational history, it's the same each time. Pull together all documents they do have. At this point in time, there's a lot of online verification that can be done with multiple countries, multiple ministries of education. So again, it may be something that's there that you may not know is there. I know that TISEP has a really good online verification database, so I would encourage you to check that out if you're able. But really just identifying what pieces you do have, working with the student. I've pulled in faculty to do kind of prior learning assessment to see if the student says they took a class and this is what the information they covered, are they at that kind of level or threshold as the faculty would expect from that subject area. So really case by case, but working with them to reconstruct what they have done, in a sense, proving that they have completed that. And then from that admissions report that I would sign off on, then they would gain entry to whatever program they're applying to. So it's kind of an ad hoc process, but it's meeting the same standards as all students have to meet, but it's meeting it in kind of a unique way. So meeting standards, but from a different perspective.
Okay, Mike, if you go back one slide, we do have, and you'll get the slide deck, but we do have some resources for you that we've put out on the slide. And one is actually our signature initiatives, which also leads to the Article 26 backpack and the inclusive admissions report that you'll see there. Also, there's our advocacy page that has statements and letters, and we have just signed on to a letter that will be sent to Congress urging their flexibility. So that's in there as well as protocol. And the protocol that we developed was really developed with COVID-19 in mind, but works for any range of crises that you might face. And then there's our COVID-19 page. I'd also like to just mention that we are planning 2 upcoming webinars if you want to get those dates on the calendar. One of them will be about Lebanon, that's November 3rd at noon, and the other one will be on Afghanistan, which is December 9th at 2 p.m. Our thinking is that we will add another one as well. We are still determining exactly what that's going to cover. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, or you would like to be involved, by all means, feel free to contact me or anybody else at ACRO. All right, that takes us to 2:58. Any last words, anyone? Any last comments, questions from the audience in the field? All right, I hope that you found this hour helpful and a step forward in what you're planning to do. So thank you, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.